Sony really seems to like the Last of Us franchise, and for good reason too. The first game is one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time and loved by gamers. The second game is also critically acclaimed, but maybe not as loved by gamers. Sony even struck a deal with HBO to make a television adaptation of the first game, which was received extraordinarily well by both television audiences who had never played the game and returning fans. And I personally think it's probably the best video game adaptation I've ever seen. The Last of Us Part 1 is actually the second time The Last of Us has been remastered. The game originally released at the end of the PlayStation 3's life cycle and was remastered for the PS4 a year later. And almost a decade after that, Naughty Dog has released The Last of Us Part 1, a remake/remaster of the first game. According to Naughty Dog, they became interested in doing a remake for The Last of Us when remaking some cutscenes or parts of cutscenes from the first game for certain flashbacks in Part 2. I'm sure that's true, but it is also really good timing for the remake to come out around the same time as the show. I played The Last of Us Part 1 for one playthrough on hard difficulty. This isn't going to be a full review of the game itself because I've already reviewed The Last of Us. Go check out that review on my channel if that's what you're looking for. This video is more going to be about the changes that have been made and any additions brought to the game. Firstly, and most obviously, the visuals have been redone, and they are fantastic. The art direction of The Last of Us was always great, with destroyed environments being overtaken by nature, vines wrapping up and around dilapidated buildings, streets flooded with water, and animals reclaiming their habitat. Part 1 takes the fantastic groundwork laid by the original game and brings it to new heights. This is one of the best looking games I've ever played. The lighting, the character models, the animations, the facial animations are all just superb. Naughty Dog have always had an eye for visuals, and Part 1 shows off what they can do with the PS5. There is some pretty obvious popping in certain parts though, which does break the illusion a little bit. The level design of the game, however, hasn't been changed whatsoever, which I don't have any issues with. I did wonder leading up to the remake's release whether or not they would implement any gameplay mechanics from Part 2 into Part 1, like the ability to go prone and sneak through grass, but Naughty Dog didn't make any changes to the way the game played, except for the AI. Naughty Dog implemented advances in their AI system into Part 1 from Part 2. However, I never really noticed that much of a difference with the enemy AI. They still seem relatively the same to me from previous versions of The Last of Us. Where I did notice an obvious improvement is with the friendly AI. Before, the friendly AI would get in your way quite often during combat encounters and would very brazenly run out of cover in the middle of a stealth section. But there might have only been one time the friendly AI did something weird in my whole playthrough of Part 1, and I don't think they got in my way once, which is a pretty big improvement. Something that Naughty Dog has always done well, maybe better than any other developer out there, is the art of quiet. Naughty Dog's other big modern game franchise, Uncharted, is a bombastic action-adventure series filled with moments of intense adrenaline and heart-pounding set pieces. But there are also lots of little moments throughout the franchise of quiet, of nothing happening. And those moments of calm are not only very needed for the pacing of the game, but they are also incredibly well done by the audio designers. The Last of Us is not a high-octane action game like Uncharted, and has many more moments of stillness and quiet, and you genuinely feel like you're there with Joel and Ellie during these moments. This is helped by the newly implemented 3D audio, the space in the audio, the sounds of leaves rustling, the footsteps of the characters, the ambient noise. It's just perfect. Naughty Dog are amongst the industry leaders when it comes to accessibility options in their games, and Part 1 is no exception. There are so many ways for you to customize your experience to suit your specific needs. There are also tons of gameplay modifiers like different filters or a mirrored game world option, or being able to turn on infinite ammo and one-shot kills. I hope more games take a cue from studios like Naughty Dog or Sony Santa Monica when implementing accessibility options in their games. Now, for some reason, the in-game collectible tracking system has been removed, which I don't understand why. In the original and remastered versions of the game, you can complete challenges in order to gain points to unlock extras in the game like new skins for Joel and Ellie. And Part 1 has all of this and many more new unlockables. But the previous versions of the games had a tracking system which let you view which challenges you've already completed, which challenges still needed to be completed, and how far along you were in those challenges. For some reason, this no longer exists in the PS5 version, and I don't see a reason why it was removed. Speaking of removed content, while Part 1 does include the base game single-player story and the DLC Left Behind, the multiplayer mode from both previous versions of the game does not appear in Part 1. It's no secret that Naughty Dog are working on a standalone version of The Last of Us's multiplayer, so it's not really surprising to see that Part 1 doesn't include a version of it. Still, I don't have to be happy about it. The game adds new workbench animations for upgrading weapons, bringing it in line with Part 2. These animations are cool and generally pretty fast, but some of them do feel a little bit long when all you want to do is upgrade your guns. The biggest sticking point for me with Part 1 was its price on release. I mean, we can debate the necessity of whether or not The Last of Us needed a remake, which it didn't, although I do think this is now the definitive way to play The Last of Us. But the real issue for me is the price. Part 1 was released at full price, which where I live in Canada is $89.99 plus tax, which is over $100. So Sony was charging $100 for a game that I already owned twice on 2 different systems. I bought a PS3, which I played the original game on. I bought a PS4, which I played the remaster on. And now, after buying a PS5, I still need to pay full price for this game that's been released 3 different times. Fuck off. I mean, maybe you haven't played The Last of Us before, and this is the first time you'd be spending money on it. I still think it's far too expensive for what it is. Naughty Dog clearly put a lot of effort into the things that they did change and add to Part 1, and I'm not trying to downplay those. But you know what they didn't do for Part 1? They didn't have to come up with any music, they didn't have to write any of the story and dialogue, they didn't have to design any levels, they didn't have to design combat, they didn't have to cast actors or record lines or do motion capture for cutscenes, because all of that stuff was already done. The original release of The Last of Us started from scratch, designing and iterating and ideating and writing and rewriting, and was released at full price, which is absolutely fine. But the remake, after already having had a remaster, is charging full price again for doing less work than the initial release. I just can't get behind that, and I think that we as consumers need to stop supporting this kind of nonsense. I was originally not going to review Part 1 because I did not want to pay $100 for it, but I saw it on sale for around $65 at my local EB Games and decided to pick it up at that price. I don't regret picking it up at that price, but I do think that should have been the price from the start. Now, I can't do a video about The Last of Us Part 1 without mentioning the disastrous PC port launch of the game. It had terrible, awful performance, tons of technical issues, bugs, and glitches. It was frankly unfinished and should not have been released in the state that it was. Sony is pretty hit or miss in my opinion when it comes to PC ports. Some of them are pretty damn good, like God of War or Days Gone. Some of them are really not, like The Last of Us Part 1 or Horizon Zero Dawn. I do like that they're bringing their games to PC, but they have to be more consistent with the quality of their ports. So to sum up, I do think that The Last of Us Part 1 is the definitive way to play this game. Should you pay full price to play it? No, I don't think so. But ultimately, that is a decision for you to make. In the future, whenever I feel like replaying The Last of Us, I will play this version of the game. I just wish it had been priced reasonably. So I guess that's the end of my overview for The Last of Us Part 1. If you do want to see my actual review of The Last of Us, the link will be in the description. Thanks for watching.